Hey there friends, welcome back to another Legally on America video. I'm of course Paul Glasgow here. Short video for you today to point out some of the stupidity of the anti-gun movement on the far left. And the reason why I'm here in my driveway essentially is because in my studio right now, I have everything set up for a really special interview. Somebody very special today that's going to air tomorrow. It's the VP for Gun Owners of America, Eric Pratt. We'll be talking about some stuff that's kind of serious that we need to be working on right now, that the Trump administration has requested of gun owners to give kind of opinions about what their expectations are with the ATF. And I know I'm simplifying it, but that's what the gist of that video is going to be. So Eric will be my guest this afternoon. And again, that video will air tomorrow with hopefully some action items that we can disseminate to the public to help get the word to the Trump administration about things that are important to us regarding the Second Amendment. In the meantime, I had to chuckle a little bit this morning. I ran across a post by the Giffords Anti-Gun Organization. They were citing red flag gun laws, which you guys know. Honestly, if you don't know me well enough to know yet, I do believe the number one threat to honest, law-abiding gun owners, you can spin that however you want to good people who own firearms in the United States. I truly, in my heart, believe the biggest threat is a red flag gun law. And the reason why is because they can be so easily abused, and they are easily abused. Some of these states out there, like Michigan, who I'm talking about today, have really ridiculous red flag gun laws. And the Giffords anti-gun group this morning was bragging about how red flag gun laws have been applied, get this guys, to youngsters as young as 6 years old. And they're happy about that. I want you to understand what they're talking about. I honestly never wrap my head around the angle they're taking with this. This makes it even more dangerous because what they're saying is, if you have a 6-year-old, like was the case here, that goes to school, makes a threat, any kind of threat, it can be an idle threat, it can be an actual threat, it doesn't matter. Because now we're treating these youngsters like adults. So we're thinking that to determine if they're a threat to themselves or their family, we take everybody's word for it. Well, you know they gleefully take everybody's word for it when a 6-year-old is running their mouth about having access to firearms. And the way the law is structured is if they hear that from the child, they can issue that red flag gun law against that 6-year-old child, unbeknownst to the parents. Go to the house, have legal right, and I say legal right because they really don't have that legal right. Constitution does exist, even in Michigan, but they have that legal right according to their red flag gun law, where they can get a warrant from a judge, go into the house. Yes, that's exactly right. Go into that person's house. The parents of the 6-year-old, they can force their way into that home, search that home for an accessible gun. And you know how that works. If it's not locked up behind 10 different layers of security, that's going to be an accessible gun. And at that point, you know what they do? They confiscate those guns. Doesn't matter if the parents are of perfect sound mind and body. If the 6-year-old made that threat and that 6-year-old says, I have access to guns, law enforcement of that red flag gun law, when they are trying to enforce that, determine that the child did in fact have access to those firearms, confiscation. Parents can always go back and petition the courts to get their guns back. Parents did nothing wrong, I might add to you guys. Now, I say they've done nothing wrong. I think we've got a parenting issue here too. We talk about this all the time. Not saying that the fact that the red flag gun law was instituted was the parents' fault, but it sounds like maybe a little bit of home discipline might be in effect, so those stupid little kids don't go running their mouths at home. And again, at school. I understand kids run their mouth. Heck, we all did stupid stuff whenever we were young too. I knew where the line was. And I knew once I crossed that line, excuse my French, but an ass whooping was coming. So sometimes I would tease that line, knowing that I might get in trouble for getting up to that line. And I might get punished for putting a toe over that line. But I knew that whenever I stepped over it and the other foot followed, that ass whooping was coming. So I weighed out my risk versus reward when it came to ass whoopings versus crossing that line. And I feel like that's a lost art today. that many parents simply just are not involved in their children's lives enough to where they don't have any semblance of authority figure or a punishment. There has to be a punishment that could be due if you're willing to cross those lines. And a 6-year-old going to a school saying they're going to shoot the place up, to me, is a massive overstep of those lines. Now, let me say the preposterousness of this stupid claim of this 6-year-old. Now, by the way, in Michigan, it's happened with a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old that I know of, that I'm aware of on record. The 6-year-old, whenever they went to the house, I won't say busted their way in because I don't want to embellish, but whenever they made their way into that home, they did not find firearms that were at that point in time that were accessible to the child. So they did the parents a favor by not taking their guns. I think the same thing happened with an 8 or 10-year-old, but there's also another case where they did confiscate the firearms because they determined that the child could have had access to those firearms. Again, we're talking about judgment calls here. You know, what's the definition of a secure firearm? What's the definition of an accessible firearm? I disagree with all of that. I think that a lot of that has to do with parenting. If these children have access to firearms and they're a danger, that's the parent's fault. The parent's not raising that child right. Because I grew up around guns like you guys did. There was never a gun locked up in my house. There was guns next to my mom's side of the bed, next to my dad's side of the bed, hanging on gun racks in their room, hanging on gun racks in the living room, hanging on gun racks in mine and my brother's bedroom. Backseat window of my dad's truck. There were guns everywhere, accessible, including ammunition. We never thought to nor threatened to shoot up schools. My point in all of this is a huge exploitation of a red flag gun law using a child. And in fact, one case, the child lied about having guns at the house. They went to their house, we're talking about the Michigan instances, went to their house, determined there were no guns there. These people now have figured out another way to game the system. That's why every single little common sense law, and I say that so sarcastically because they're not common sense, they're stupid, they're workarounds to try to get at us. But every single law that they put out there is a threat because they find a way, they lose sight of what the intent of the law was and who it was intended to be forced upon. So we're going to go kick the door in of every single parent who has done nothing wrong, of a child who lies and runs his mouth about guns. And I'm not saying that bullying is ever a reason, but if you have a kid that's on the verge of being bullied, in other words, he doesn't feel totally bullied, but he feels like he has to flex a little bit, maybe he says, I got guns at home and I'll shoot you, to his bullier, right? Not saying it's right, I'm just telling you things like that will and most likely are happening. So it's very sad that they're using the children to exploit right now to do all these things. And I have to mention this also. Where are the Democrats? Where are the left-leaning people and all that? Because you know what neighborhoods these are? It ain't my neighborhood. There's no kids running around my neighborhood saying that they're going to shoot the school up. There ain't no 6-year-olds in my neighborhood saying they have access to guns. It's those low-income neighborhoods where these kids are having zero to, very little, if any, access with their parents, no interaction with their parents. So we go back to the parenting issue. These kids are running their mouth. If you're going to have a single mom who probably and likely has one firearm, she's not going to put it behind 3 layers of security. Why? Because she is a single mother in a low-income neighborhood. And she has an immediate threat 1 door away from her, across the street, across the hall. And she needs access to that firearm because her door's probably already been kicked in 3 or 4 times. We've all seen the door jams of some of these homes. They've been repaired 50 and 60 times. It's because they get kicked in all the time because it's rampant crime in those areas. And that's the people they're trying to disarm using the exploitation of these 6-year-old kids in order to do that, to say, we took another gun off the street. Because remember, you cannot predict if a gun would be used in a crime. But they have a measurable statistic, the ATF especially, of guns taken off the street. They could take it from me. and they still use that as a feather in their cap as a gun taken off the street. That's what they measure. So they don't care if they're putting that parent, that single mom, in any kind of risk out there. Why? Because they get to say, another gun off the street, stacking those numbers up. Guys, look out for that interview tomorrow with Eric Pratt from GOA. It's going to be a great interview. I encourage you guys to tune in to take a look at it. And I'm going to go get the studio ready for that interview. Thank you guys. Hey, if you don't mind, share the video. Put the word out there that we are fighting for the Second Amendment and we are fighting for America. And we want to make sure that everybody hears that word. Thanks, guys.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. He's so